Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. Welcome to the most comprehensive Hindu analysis on YouTube. So first, let's begin the discussion by looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 10 important topics. These topics will easily cover around 14 to 15 articles in today's newspaper. So let's cover all the topics comprehensively so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. But before we start, I have a very important announcement. In the recent UPSC CSE results for 2025, Unacademy learners have performed spectacularly well. Out of the entire toppers list, we are proud to announce that nearly 110 plus students were Unacademy learners who were part of our paid online classroom program. That includes All India Rank 1 Anuj Agnihotri and the many others. We also had several other learners who were availing the free classes on the Unacademy platform and some who availed the mock interviews as well. So, to celebrate this success of Unacademy students, we are celebrating the Manzil offer, and now you can avail all our IAS courses at a 60% discount. The subscription is now available at just 16,999 along with double validity. That is, if you avail a 6-month subscription, you get a 6-month free extension. The same goes for 12 and 18-month subscription as well. And if you avail a subscription of more than 18 months, you also get CSE Assure. Under CSE Assure, let's say for some reason you don't clear the exam in your first attempt, then your next attempt is entirely on us. So to avail the offer, you need to click on the link provided in the video description. And on the subscription page, you might see a different fee. But to avail the discount, you have to enter the code IAS English. And I'm told the offer would come to an end on the 17th of March. So those interested, please check out by clicking on the link provided in the description box below. So let's get started and look at the first topic. On page number 6, there's a very insightful column written by Dr. Shashi Tharoor. In this column, Shashi Tharoor is talking about the Washington Consensus. It's a topic which is extremely relevant for international relations and as well as for economy. See, many of you might be struggling to grasp what's happening in today's world, be it the wars or the anti-immigration trend, the rise of far right-wing extremism. We are basically witnessing a very chaotic world order. Now, some of these developments, they trace back their origin back to the 1990s. And at least in some part, the Washington Consensus is responsible for what's happening around the world today. You look at any country, there is a trend of protectionism. There is a trend of ethno-nationalism and economic nationalism, where countries are becoming more inward-looking, conservative in their policies. You see this being reflected in economic policies such as tariff policies, for example. You see this in immigration policies as well. So much of this is a result of the haphazard liberalization, privatization, and globalization that was pushed through the Washington Consensus. So, if not entirely, at least in some part, the Washington Consensus and the LPG reforms it pushed across the world is in some way responsible for what's happening today. So let's go deep into the article. I'll take you beyond the article as well. And let's discuss this important topic, which can be relevant for both mains and prelims. So first, let's understand what is this Washington Consensus? Because not many students would have heard about it. The Washington Consensus, the term, was coined by a very well-known British economist, John Williamson. It was coined in 1989. And this theory, it evolved in the mid-1980s to 1990s. That's when the world, especially the developing world, was facing severe macroeconomic challenges. Developing nations, poor countries, least developed countries, especially in Latin America, in Africa, and across Asia. These global south countries, which belonged to the developing world, they were facing a severe economic crisis. Some of them were going through a debt crisis. Some of them were facing a foreign exchange crisis. Some countries had borrowed excessively. They were not able to service the debt. Some were dealing with a balance of payments crisis, similar to what India dealt with in 1991-92. So during this period, the Washington Consensus was brought out primarily by Western governments, by Western capitals. So, under the Washington Consensus, 10 free market principles were outlined, and they were proposed as a solution, like a panacea, which could solve all the problems of the developing world. So, this was conceptualized in Western capitals like Washington, London, etc. That's why the name Washington Consensus. And it was pushed by the Bretton Woods institutions, the IMF, and the World Bank, which are again primarily controlled by Western governments. US and Europe, they have a disproportionate control over these global financial institutions, as you know, with IMF largely controlled by the European Union and the World Bank largely controlled by the United States. Through the Bretton Woods institutions, as part of the development programs and economic liberalization, these countries, they pushed and almost enforced the Washington Consensus on other developing countries. They proposed this idea as a easy solution to develop these nations, to overcome their problems, to solve their macroeconomic challenges, and to provide for economic growth and development. So, under the Washington Consensus, there are 10 free market principles that were pushed. So, let's take a look at these principles first. The first principle is fiscal discipline, ensuring that the government's revenue deficits are well under control with limited government borrowing. See, this called for a limited role of the government in the economy. It was essentially pushing governments to take a back step when it comes to control over markets and the economy and allow the private sector to play a greater role. This is the era of new public management, which students of public administration would easily recognize. Under the NPM model, which was pushed in the 1990s, the idea was that government should play a minimalistic role. It should not over-regulate. It should not control every aspect and lever of the economy. Rather, government should act as a catalyst and enable the private sector to deliver all the services. So, the focus here was to reduce the role of the government in the economy and push the governments to reduce their borrowing, reduce their expenditure, and keep the deficits under control, maintain fiscal balance and fiscal discipline. Then, a complete reordering of public spending, a complete restructuring of government budgeting and resource allocation. Usually, governments in developing nations, poor countries, they tend to spend on populist schemes or schemes which may not really deliver socio-economic benefits, but rather it would reap electoral gains for political parties. So, a push was given to focus more on pro growth sectors like education and healthcare. Next was tax reform to widen the tax base, increase tax collection, bring more revenue to the government, ensuring that there is a fair taxation structure. Then, interest rate liberalization, allow the markets to determine the interest rates. Instead of the government and the central bank tightly controlling the interest rate, let the markets determine the interest rates. Same for foreign exchange and the value of the currency. Usually, in developing countries where they're vulnerable to currency fluctuations, they tend to control the forex market and prop up their currency. So, here the Washington Consensus was recommending that you need to focus on providing a free space for the currency value to be determined by the markets, so that if the value of your currency devalues, it might be good for your exports, which could push export led growth, creating more jobs in that particular country. It called for trade liberalization, removal or reduction of tariffs, removing some of the non tariff barriers, making it easy for cross border movement of goods, services, and people. Then came the relaxation on FDI rules. attracting more foreign direct investment, allowing global capital, especially from the global north, from developed industrialized Western countries, to flood the small developing underdeveloped nations and use that foreign capital and allow foreign companies to play a big role in the development of the economy of these countries. Next, privatization. Since the whole ideology was that government should play a minimal role in the economy, the goal was to push the government out of business, because the whole idea of NPM was that government has no business in being in business. That government should not be running airlines, government should not be managing hotels, it should not be manufacturing soaps or watches. That's not the job of the government. The idea was to keep the government out and privatize public sector entities which had become inefficient, corrupt, and very slow, which were dragging the growth of many countries. Then deregulation. Most developing nations were overregulated with a plethora of laws, regulations. Many of them were outdated since the colonial times, the pre World War era. So the goal was to reform the laws, minimize government regulation, to keep Inspector Raj, License Raj away, and allow the market forces to take control. Then, protection of property rights, especially in few communist socialist countries, particularly in Latin America, where state owned all the resources, including property. This was a big disincentive for private capitalists to take up investments and start new industrial projects. So, protection of property became one of the key fundamental pillars of the Washington Consensus, where private property ownership would be recognized and protected legally or constitutionally. So, these 10 principles, as you can see, they were ideologically rooted in the Thatcher and the Reagan based economic model that we saw, which came up in Britain and United States. President Reagan in the US, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher in Britain, they were champions of such free market policies, where they believed that in a free market with limited government regulation, growth would automatically occur. This was the whole assumption on which Reaganian and, or as we call it, Reaganomics and Thatcherite logic was based upon. It was based on the assumption that when you allow market forces to take over and government takes a back step acting as a facilitator, it would automatically liberalize, privatize, globalize the economy, bringing benefits for everyone. Basically, the focus on inequality, achieving inclusive, equitable growth, was seen as a secondary objective under this model. This model was pushed by Bretton Woods institutions, the IMF and the World Bank. So this was again a reiteration of the trickle down theory of economics, where you reduce taxes for the capitalists and the elites, the wealthy, allowing them to make more investments at the top and hope that the benefits of economic activity and growth will trickle down to the bottom layers of the society. So this was a presumption that was made. The whole logic of this Washington Consensus was based on the assumption that this model will work everywhere in the world. Just because the free market model worked in Western countries, they assumed that this would work in developing nations, in small countries in Africa, in Latin America, and across the world. Now, this is where the Washington Consensus leaves behind a very controversial, disturbing legacy. It has been responsible for the bankruptcy of several countries and governments. It has been responsible for social upheavals. Because, see, this was a one size fits all model which Western countries were pushing and imposing on others by using the control they had on the global financial system. In short, long story short, Washington Consensus was nothing but your LPG reforms, something which India also implemented post the crisis of 1991 1992. But of course, in the Indian context, we customized it to suit the socio-economic and political requirements of India. But there was constant pressure from World Bank, IMF. They would place conditions. For example, when India availed a IMF bailout to deal with the BOP crisis, IMF placed several conditions on India which would, in a way, compromise our sovereignty, our economic monetary sovereignty, forcing countries to devalue their currency, forcing countries to open up their markets, reduce tariffs, and allow space for FDIs and foreign involvement, is something which was resisted by several countries. And this ended up having a disastrous impact. Though it did bring about a great degree of globalization, it basically interconnected markets across the world. It flooded Western capital into the global South, especially Western companies, Western capitalists. They largely benefited out of the Washington Consensus. And this basically ensured greater profits for the Western world as well. Though it did bring growth in some of the Asian countries, in Latin American countries, it ended up having several consequences and it became a major source of destabilization, something which affects the world even today. With greater movement of goods, services, and people, and without adapting this model into the local context and circumstances, it became a recipe for disaster for many countries and governments. So, when you look at some of the recent financial crisis situations that we have seen, much of it is traced back to the Washington Consensus itself. In an interconnected, globalized world, a crisis in one part of the world will have a cascading effect affecting each and every country. Take, for example, the Asian financial crisis following the dot-com bubble, which burst in 1997. The crisis, which was then restricted to Asian economies, particularly in Southeast Asia, very quickly spread and affected economies across the world, including the Indian economy. Then we saw the 2007-2008 subprime crisis, the housing market crisis in US, which triggered a global recession, which led to the collapse of big banks and financial firms, triggering a global recession that affected the entire global economy. It resulted in job losses. It slowed down growth across the world. It pushed governments to spend more to give fiscal stimulus, which further increased their fiscal deficit, something that India also suffered from. Though India managed to do pretty well following the 2008 financial crisis, the excessive government spending because of the fiscal stimulus ended up becoming a big fiscal burden on the Indian government. Then we also saw how WTO became all the more important in order to champion the principles of the Washington Consensus, to allow for free movement of goods, services, and investments. At WTO, negotiations began in the mid 1990s to replace the GATT. And as you know, the various ministerial conferences that took place in Seattle, in Cancun, in Doha as well, it ended up dividing the developed world and the developing nations on fundamental issues of trade. A major division came up between the developed North and the developing South, be it over agriculture related trade, or be it over subsidies or state incentives, or be it with regard to trade related investment measures or TRIMs, be it with regard to intellectual property rights under the TRIPS, trade related intellectual property rights, or government subsidies provided to domestic producers and manufacturers. On all these questions, the Western world tried imposing their logic, forcing developing nations to adopt them. And this led to a major division. As a result, several of the WTO ministerial conferences, they did not yield any major announcements or commitments. So the blind adoption of this free market model without making any changes to suit the local social and political context, it had a devastating impact on several economies. Yes, it generated growth. For example, India also benefited. India did register tremendous growth during the period, but it had its negative consequences as well. The trend of globalization is in many ways responsible for the rise in far right extremism that you see today. In fact, many experts, economic experts, and as well as experts of sociology and anthropology, they link the 2008 financial crisis. They treat that as a turning point for the rise of white supremacy, far right wing extremism, neo Nazi ideology across Western countries from Europe to US, the rise in racism, and also the rise of leaders like Donald Trump and political movements like MAGA, Brexit, eventually traces back to the Washington Consensus of the mid 1980s. If not entirely, partly the blame lies with the Washington Consensus and the free markets that were promoted. Yes, the free market model is good. Definitely, any government should maintain fiscal responsibility, right? There should be tax reforms. There should be free space for the markets to operate. There should be minimal role of the government. No, there's no one denying that. But how it is implemented, right? That is what matters. It's all about respective governments and sovereign states deciding for themselves as to what is better for their context, for their society, for their economy, for their people. But when it is enforced externally through conditions placed by IMF and World Bank, which are mainly looking to satisfy the interests of Western capitalists and Western governments, it ends up having a disastrous impact. And the rise in conservatism and protectionism today is largely a result of this. The inequality that spread, it even triggered riots and social unrest in many developing nations in 1990s and early 2000s. Though there was rapid growth in some sections of the society in the global south countries, the widespread inequality that increased post this period was primarily because this growth was not inclusive, it was not sustainable, it was not equitable. Right? We have seen this happening in India as well, where the rich become richer, controlling more wealth and resources, whereas the poor, the middle class remain where they are without seeing much upliftment. Despite the best measures, the socio-economic policies of the government, the trickle-down theory has never really worked. The top-down approach for poverty alleviation never really works. You need a bottom-up approach as well. That is something which India has engineered later on. But if you look at the impact of the Washington Consensus, it's very, very evident and clear. And Shashi Tharoor also points this out, that today's political movements like MAGA, Brexit that we have seen, which are primarily conservative, protectionist ideas, they're all rooted in far right wing, racist ideas that migrants are a problem, that foreign trade has become problematic, that tariffs is a way to weaponize the trade and use it for geopolitical leverage. That's exactly what Donald Trump has been doing. So they have built entire political base on this, attracted voters, and this explains the chaotic geopolitical policies of such governments as well. And this has become a global trend, the rise of far right wing extremism, the rise of religious conservatism across the world. It's a trend you see in the last 2 decades, which is primarily evident after the 2008 financial crisis. So, if not entirely, part of the blame lies in the rampant globalization and free markets that were pushed by the West through the Washington Consensus. So, that is the core point you need to understand here. Now, let's expose the hypocrisy of these developed countries as well. When you look at the developed industrialized world, right, what we call as the Western world, these countries developed primarily in the 1950s, 60s, 70s period, in the post-World War period. You take United States, European countries, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, etc. They never followed this model themselves. When they rose as industrialized economies, it was primarily through state-led intervention, where governments were playing a direct role in the industrial strategy of these countries. If US became industrialized, if Japan became industrialized, it was not just because of capitalists and free markets. It was primarily because their governments were actively intervening in the economy, providing the required support through a well-calibrated state-led intervention. They themselves never followed this model, but they tried imposing it on developing nations and other countries. And that is where the hypocrisy lies. So when you look at the lessons to be learned from here, the problem with Washington Consensus was not the principle or the theory behind it. Right? The economic logic was very sound. Problem was it was not acclimatized, or it was not adapted or customized to the local context of each country. Though India did its best, that's why India managed to come out much better than other countries. But still, the enforcement of these principles from the West is in a way responsible for all the trends that you're seeing in today's world, the socio-economic trends, the geopolitical trends that you're seeing today, the rise in radicalism, extremism, and as well as conservative protectionist ideas. It all traces back to this moment in the mid 1980s and 1990s. So now, is there a new consensus? Has Washington consensus expired? See, as I said, the principles of Washington consensus per se are not problematic, right? You need good governance, you need accountability of your government. Yes, government should play a minimal role in the economy. Free markets do deliver better growth. There's no doubt about it. But if you don't provide for adequate state intervention in the markets, if you don't maintain adequate regulation over the market, if you don't create checks and balances to prevent concentration of wealth and power, that is when this model becomes dangerous. That is where the model fails, and it provides for growth, but the growth would not be equitable, it would not be inclusive. So, this learning is something that countries need to adapt as we enter a new world order. When you look at the policies of Donald Trump or many other countries where tariffs have been weaponized, industrial subsidies are targeted. Basically, the US itself is going back to state intervention in markets. US, which has proclaimed itself as a champion of free market, today under Donald Trump is carrying out one of the biggest state intervention in the economic policy, the trade policy of the country, which is leading to all the chaos in the world. So right now the time has come for, especially for the global south, to come out with a new consensus, to come out with a new model which will work according to their respective local context. So that is the final takeaway from this article by Shashi Tharoor. That Washington consensus, though it has had a destabilizing effect on the world, the principles per se are relevant, but they need to be customized. They need to be adapted to the local context, keeping in mind local economic, social, and political considerations. So that is what we learn from this insightful article. Now, based on the topic, please take up a mains practice question. You can expect a society based question related to the side effects of liberalization, privatization, and globalization, or an economy or IR based question on Washington consensus, right? So please prepare for the topic by practicing your answer writing. Now let's move to the next article. On page 6, there's a detailed column by Harsh V. Pant from the Observer Research Foundation, where the two authors examine the recent developments in India-Canada relations. Recently, just a couple of weeks ago, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney carried out a very important high-profile visit to India. Unfortunately, it did not get enough media attention and limelight, all thanks to the war that US and Israel launched against Iran, right? Because of the major conflict in West Asia, this important visit by the Canadian PM, it got crowded out. So India-Canada relations have now been reset after nearly 3 years of turbulent relations between the two sides. In fact, from 2021-2022, India's ties with Canada was severely compromised until 2024. And it was all because of the then Canadian leader, Justin Trudeau, the politics of his party, the attempt to please vote banks, to attract the Sikh community, is what primarily led Justin Trudeau to adopt a very irrational and even a hostile approach towards India, which ended up ruining the relationship between India and Canada. See, historically, India and Canada have been great friends. Right after India's independence, Canada was one of the few developed nations which started assisting and helping India in its development and growth, be it in the field of agriculture, in the field of technology, including the nuclear domain. Canada was the initial partner country of India. In fact, when India was laying the foundation of its atomic research and nuclear energy program, it was Canada which supplied the first ever reactor in collaboration with the United States, the Cyrus reactor, which was part of Canada India research in the field of atomic energy. So there was a time when India Canada enjoyed fantastic relations. Of course, the Cold War rivalries and divisions had affected this relationship. But even in the 1980s, there was a major impact on India Canada ties because of the rise of the Khalistan movement. Since Canada is home to a very large Sikh diaspora, and a small section of the Sikh diaspora had been radicalized by Khalistani extremists. So in the 1980s, when Khalistan movement was raging in Punjab with the direct support of Pakistan's ISI, and it was posing a serious security threat to India, we saw the parallel rise of pro-Khalistan movements across the world amongst few sections of the Sikh diaspora, especially in Western countries like Canada, European countries like UK, Italy, Belgium, Germany, France, even in the United States. India faced a serious challenge back in the 1980s. Even then, the Canadian government, which was under Prime Minister Trudeau, the senior Trudeau, the father of Justin Trudeau, had also adopted a biased policy towards India without providing much support for India's counter-terrorism efforts. Because the Sikh community was seen as a major vote bank by this political party to which the Trudeau family belongs to. So they refused to cooperate with India and they did not provide much assistance to tackle the terror threat and the major threat for India's security and sovereignty that emanated from Canadian soil. Even in the 80s, our ties had been disrupted. It had been ruptured. It took a lot of effort from India to curb and put down the Khalistan movement by the 1990s. India managed to break Pakistan's links with the Khalistani outfits. India exercised decisive counterinsurgency, counter-terror operations within Punjab and even managed to dismantle some of the foreign networks from US to Canada to Europe. It was this multi-pronged effort of India which managed to almost decimate the movement and it became a dormant movement. So post 1990s, the ties had started flourishing as India became a major economy, a major market as well. India-Canada ties had flourished. Canada had become one of the important trading partners for India. For India, Canada was a key export market. Both countries were collaborating in the field of technology, security, defense. We basically had common interests, even in the field of climate action. But in recent years, particularly post 2021, 2022, under Justin Trudeau, these complexities started coming back. Because over the last decade and a half, we have seen deliberate attempts across the world to try and revive the dormant Khalistan movement. And India believes that Pakistan is again behind these attempts to revive the dormant Khalistan movement. From UK to Italy to Australia to New Zealand to Canada and US, we have seen attempts being made to revive the dormant Khalistan movement by a very minority section of the radicalized section of the Sikh diaspora. See, the Sikhs across the world, from India to around the world, they are a very peaceful community and a pro-India community. It's only a very small section of these radicalized extremists who are creating the problems. So in recent years, we saw the re-emergence of Khalistani terror groups, such as Khalistan Tiger Force, Babar Khalsa International, International Sikh Youth Federation, and the others. All these outfits are designated terrorist organizations by India under the UAPA. So in Canada, recently in 2023, one of the wanted terrorists, Hardeep Singh Nijjar, was shot down by unknown gunmen. This assassination of a wanted terrorist was quickly blamed on the Indian government by Justin Trudeau's administration. Canada alleged that they had intelligence obtained through the Five Eyes Initiative, which is an intelligence coalition between US, Canada, Britain, and Australia and New Zealand. According to Justin Trudeau, they had electronic intercepts to prove that India's intelligence agency RAW was involved in the targeted killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Though the evidence was never made public, Canada went to any extent possible to blame the incident on India, though India denied the charges. And when the things escalated, when Canada started pursuing a criminal investigation into this, and similar charges came up in the US in a related conspiracy, this raised serious questions as well about India's involvement, India's intelligence operations. However, none of the charges were clearly established. But though in the US, there is one Indian national, Nikhil Gupta, who's currently on trial, accused of being part of a similar assassination plot to kill another Khalistani extremist, Gurpatwant Singh Pannu, the leader of International Sikh Youth Federation. So this cast a big shadow on India's ties with Canada and US as well. So as a result, India had retaliated and Canada started counter retaliating. When Canada made these allegations and it ignored India's basic concerns about pro Khalistani elements, India downgraded the diplomatic ties. We reduced the number of diplomats. We declared some of their diplomats as persona non grata. We stopped issuing visas. The trade was also brought down. It affected Indian students and travelers and businessmen. The proposed free trade agreement, which was under negotiation, was completely suspended. So the entire relationship took a massive hit and it did not recover until 2024, until Justin Trudeau stepped down. Following elections, Canada now has a new leader, a new government in power under Mark Carney. And since last year, Canada has been trying to repair the damage in the relationship because these two countries, which have so many common interests, they can't stay away from each other. We have a common vision for the Indo-Pacific. We have a common approach towards the world order. And Canada, which depends so heavily on the US, has been affected by Trump's erratic policies and tariffs. Trump keeps referring to Canada as another state of the US, right? He has threatened Canada with heavy tariffs, threatening to dismantle its economy. Similar threats faced by India. So it's only natural for India, Canada to align again and focus on their common interests. So last year, Canada extended an olive branch by inviting Prime Minister Modi to the G7 outreach summit. And this provided an opportunity for India, Canada to try and reset the ties which had been damaged. So now this visit by Mark Carney establishes the reciprocal nature of diplomacy. After PM Modi's visit to Canada for the G7 outreach summit, now the visit of the Canadian leader has given that opportunity to repair the damage and take the relationship forward. Now, when you look at our trade and economic ties, it's quite significant. For India, Canada is a key export market. We export gems, jewelry, textiles, pharmaceutical products, iron and steel, and other engineering products as well. So it is a key market. Our bilateral trade is at around $30 billion. Canada is also a big source of investment, especially the Canadian pension funds, right? They invest in India's infrastructure, in India's startups, in our capital markets, making Canada a major source of FDI. Even for Canada, India is a key market. There are hundreds of Canadian companies working in India in the field of tech, finance, etc. Canada is a leader in some advanced fields of technology, from clean energy to nuclear energy. So there are a lot of opportunities where both sides can work together. That's the reason why this visit becomes all the more important. We also have common security defense concerns. Both countries look at China with suspicion, China as a strategic threat. Both countries have experienced how China can leverage economic advantage to gain geopolitical leverage over them. They both want a stable Indo-Pacific. Both India and Canada want the wars and conflicts to end, which have disrupted the global order. And India desperately needs some of the key resources that are found in Canada. Canada is blessed with a vast wealth of mineral resources, from hydrocarbons to critical minerals to uranium. Canada has almost everything that India wants, right? So, as a result, this partnership has acquired greater significance. We also share excellent cultural ties and people to people relationship. You have a very strong Indian diaspora community, which is 1.8 million strong, with a very large Sikh diaspora community. And as I said, majority of the Sikh diaspora are peaceful and pro-India uh, elements. It's only a very small minority faction who still believe in that radical ideology. And we believe that there is a Pakistani involvement as well to try and revive the dormant and dead Khalistan movement. So this has become a thorn in the relationship. But the presence of a large Indian community and a large Sikh diaspora is what binds the two countries together. You also have a number of Indian students, lakhs of them, studying in the country, preferring Canada as a destination for higher education. Before the relationship got affected, lakhs of Indian students would prefer to study in Canada. They find a lot of work opportunities as well. Though now the market has turned, Canada was a preferred destination for students and Indian professionals. So it's in this context that the visit becomes so important. During this visit, around 8 important agreements were signed. One of the most important agreement is on the initiation of the FTA talks. The proposed FTA, which had been paused because of Justin Trudeau's policies, has now been resumed. The terms of reference have been framed for the negotiators to work out a comprehensive economic partnership agreement, which can help in doubling the bilateral trade volume. I told you, right now the bilateral trade is around $30 billion. So under the FTA, once it's finalized and brought into effect, the goal is to more than double the bilateral trade to $70 billion. That is the potential which exists in this relationship. Then, as I said, Canada is blessed with several precious resources, one of them being uranium, which is critical for India's future energy plans. As India prioritizes nuclear energy to decarbonize the economy, to focus on clean renewable energy, nuclear energy is going to be critical. But the disadvantage for India is that we don't have sufficient uranium. India's goal is to have an installed nuclear capacity of 100 gigawatts by 2047, which means we have to increase the nuclear capacity by more than 10 times. Because as of today, right now, the installed capacity of nuclear energy in our country is just 8 to 9 gigawatts. So if we have to increase the share of the nuclear energy by more than 10 times to reach the 100 gigawatt target by 2047, we need more and more uranium from other countries. We depend heavily on uranium imports. Almost 70% of our uranium requirement is met through imports. We have an import dependency here. But compared to oil and gas dependency, this is much better. Canada can be a reliable, long-term, and safe and trusted supplier. Recently, we have signed a deal with Kazakhstan, which is the world's largest uranium producer, which is known to host the second largest uranium reserves in the world. Now, we have backed this up with an agreement with Canada. India's Department of Atomic Energy has entered into this agreement with a Canadian company, Camco. And under the contract, Canada would be supplying about 10,000 tons of uranium ore concentrates worth close to 2 billion US dollars from 2027 to 2035. This will help India to become more self-sufficient with regard to its energy requirements. Compared to regular imports of oil and gas, you're seeing what's happening with Hormuz Strait and the kind of crunch which is getting created in India. Such trusted, reliable imports of uranium would be much, much better for India, which will help India to become a little more self reliant. It will shield India from supply shocks and geopolitical shocks. That's why this uranium deal is one of the most important agreements that we have signed in recent times. Apart from this, agreements were signed in the field of food security, cultural ties, scientific research, critical emerging technologies, including AI and semiconductors and quantum computing. We've also signed an agreement on exploration and supply of critical minerals. As I told you, Canada has plenty of critical minerals. And this aligns with the goal of Pax Silica initiative, which India has recently joined. And Canada is also part of the Pax Silica initiative, right? That focuses on strengthening the supply chains and reducing the dependency on China for accessing key minerals from silicon to other critical minerals that are required for semiconductors and AI technologies. They've also agreed to establish a Australia, India, Canada partnership. The three countries have agreed to set up this new partnership focused on technology and innovation. It's a trilateral partnership involving Australia, Canada, and India to promote technological collaboration and collaboration in the field of innovation. So they'll focus on cutting edge technologies. So these were the key outcomes of the visit of the Canadian PM. So this marks a complete turnaround of the relationship. That's why the topic is very, very important. So this is your practice question. So please use it for your answer writing practice. Now moving on, we have an editorial on page number 6 that focuses on the current inflation levels in the country. See, recently, I'm sure all of you are aware, a new CPI index has been introduced by the government. The base year has now been changed. The composition and the methodology also has been changed so that it can better capture and reflect retail inflation. Right? CPI is a standard measure of inflation at the retail level. So the second CPI data for the month of February 2026 places retail inflation at 3.2%. Now, this is still well within the range prescribed to the Monetary Policy Committee of the RBI. See, the Monetary Policy Committee of RBI has been given an inflation target of 4% with a range of plus or minus 2%. So, inflation between 2 to 6% is seen as manageable, with 4% inflation being the ideal number. Now, over the last year, if you look at inflation numbers in the country, it was in the 2 to 3% range. For many months, it was under 2.5%. For few months, it even went below 2%, reaching 1.9%. But however, this was based on old CPI computation. The base effect would have played a role. So this alone can't be treated as a barometer. Now, the new inflation methodology is suggesting that there is a spike in inflation, a slight increase, though it is within the range, though there is nothing to be worried about. It is still a sign that there is a certain pressure on prices. See, when you look at retail inflation, the bigger concern is about volatile products such as food, beverages, fuel, etc. They play a big role in driving your retail inflation because these prices are very volatile, dependent on supplies. Now, food inflation previously had a higher weightage in the old CPI methodology. The weightage for food and beverages was nearly 46% in the basket of the old CPI. In the new CPI, the weightage has been reduced to bring the volatility down. The current weightage in new CPI for food and beverages is just around 36.75%. So compared to the old CPI index, the weightage for food and beverages has gone down. But despite that, the data clearly shows that there is a price rise happening in essential food commodities. For example, meats, oils, fruits, and nuts. The prices have increased and they have maintained at a higher level. Even if you look at essential vegetables, the top vegetables, tomato, onion, and potatoes, inflation in tomato has jumped very significantly because of supply related issues. But fortunately, inflation in onion and potatoes have been pretty manageable. But this is a clear sign that going ahead, we will face much more supply side constraints, especially because of the current conflict in West Asia. There is a significant pressure on fuel and gas supplies, which is going to have a cascading effect across the industry and the economy. The disruption at Strait of Hormuz, the shortage which might come up with regard to crude oil and petrol, diesel, and aviation fuel, and the bigger risk we are facing with LNG and LPG, the rising energy prices because of supply disruption due to the war, due to geopolitical shocks, will not only affect the common man, it will affect almost each and every industry, as we've been studying from the last week. From agriculture to fertilizers to pharmaceuticals to chemical industry to even tiles and pottery industry. Every sector can be affected. So as the input cost increases, it will pass down to the retail level, to the customers. Similarly, food prices can jump. Then, added to the pressure created by war, we also have a double whammy. Experts are predicting a El Nino cycle for this year's monsoon. El Nino, as you know, is the unusual warming of the waters in the South Pacific between Australia and South America. Whenever there is a El Nino phenomena in the central part of South Pacific, this results in weaker monsoon affecting rainfall, resulting in droughts. This can directly impact agricultural productivity, leading to shortage in food supplies, which could exert pressure on food inflation. So these are the big challenges that India is dealing with right now. Though the inflation is still manageable, 3.2% is completely manageable, it's well within the safe range. But going ahead, there are few indicators that inflation might jump. Now that there is a new base year, new methodology, there will be better capturing of the data, which means we might see a bigger jump. So this should not push RBI, which controls the monetary policy through the Monetary Policy Committee, to blindly increase interest rates to control inflation. Increasing interest rates, especially policy rates such as repo rate, is a standard policy of the Monetary Policy Committee, right? Because increasing interest rate will reduce liquidity in the market. And once it trickles down, it will reduce demand, thus creating some balance between supply and demand. But this may not work in the current scenario. Why? Because the current inflation we are seeing in food and fuel prices, this is not demand side inflation. It's not coming because of sudden jump in demand. This is entirely because of supply side constraints. I hope you're getting my point. So by raising interest rate and reducing liquidity, you will reduce demand, but that will not solve the supply side problem. If El Nino kicks in, monsoon gets affected and it impacts food supplies. Let's say war escalates in West Asia, Hormuz is not cleared out. Oil, fuel supplies are affected to India. That will not address the root problem. So blindly increasing interest rate is not the solution. This will end up affecting growth unnecessarily without tackling inflation, because this is supply side inflation. So easing the supply side bottlenecks is what is necessary, meaning the onus is on the government, not on the RBI. RBI can't do much with the interest rates. It will not help. Rather, the government should source oil and gas from other sources to ease that pressure. The government should focus on improving the availability of food supplies in the market. And that is what will help India in the long run to maintain inflation within the manageable limits. Coming to the next article, a big development. The government of India has requested the parliament for supplementary grants to the tune of 2 lakh crore rupees. The government has basically asked the parliament for extra money because the budgetary accounting, which was done for the last year's budget, it has been exceeded. And right now, the government needs a sudden cash infusion, not only to deal with some excess estimates, but to deal with the current global situation. The government urgently needs a emergency cash pool. So the government is mobilizing funds to the Economic Stabilization Fund. Around 57,000 crores is being requested. Since Parliament controls the Consolidated Fund of India, right? And the appropriation bill has been submitted, which is nothing but your financial statement, the budget. So as the appropriation bill gets approved and turns into the Appropriation Act, the government is asking for a supplementary grant to meet with unexpected shortages and This brings up the topic of supplementary, additional, or excess grants. Under the Indian Constitution, this is provided under Article 115. If Article 112 deals with financial statement, which is your union budget, 115 deals with supplementary, additional, excess grants. Government can request the parliament for additional funds to deal with emergencies, to deal with insufficient budgetary allocation, or if the government has overshot the budgetary allocation and sudden funds are needed, then under provisions of Article 115, government can request the parliament for supplementary grants to be provided. So overall, the government has requested around 2 lakh crores in cash outgo, out of which 57,000 crores would be set aside to deal with the current crisis that we are facing, which is mainly the oil and gas crisis. India would probably step up spending on energy imports. Now, let's look at some related articles related to the conflict which is happening in West Asia. There have been a lot of conflicting news reports, especially in Indian media and social media, that Iran has permitted Indian vessels or vessels headed towards India to pass through Hormuz Strait. But please understand this. The government of India and Iran both have clarified that no such permission has been granted. This is almost entirely fake news. A lot of social media posts are going viral that India's foreign minister spoke to Iranian counterpart and Iran has agreed to give a free pass for Indian vessels and ships going towards India. So this has gone viral as well. Please don't believe them. The MEA has clarified. Iranian government also has clarified that no such exemption has been made. In fact, the new Ayatollah has already said that Hormuz will remain blocked. Any vessel trying to cross Hormuz without Iran's permission will be targeted. So you might ask then how did few vessels reach India? You would have read news reports that a couple of vessels carrying crude oil, mainly from Saudi Arabia, have reached India. Then another Indian vessel owned by Shipping Corporation of India has crossed the Hormuz Strait and it will arrive in India in another day. And it's carrying LPG, which is much needed, desperately needed right now. So how about this? How did they cross? They have crossed at their own risk. See, ships carry equipment, a transponder known as AIS, Automatic Identification System, right? So this identification system is always turned on, which helps in tracking the location of a ship. But many vessels turn it off when they have to conceal the location. That's how shadow fleets operate. Shadow fleets of Russia, Iran, they operate by turning off the transponders to mask the location and to transport oil covertly to avoid Western sanctions. So some of the vessels which have crossed Hormuz and reached India or trying to reach India, they have done it at their own risk. Iran has made it clear any vessel found to be crossing without their permission will be hit and will be targeted. But the 3-4 vessels which have managed to cross, it's a big relief for us because a couple of vessels which have already reached Mumbai, they were carrying crude oil from Saudi Arabia. Now another vessel which has crossed Hormuz is carrying LPG, around 55,000 tons of LPG, which will roughly take care of 1 day's of gas requirement in India. Every day we need around 80,000 metric tons. That's India's daily demand. So 55,000 tons will roughly take care of 1 day's demand. So we are not through the crisis. The crisis is still there. And the government has urged caution when you're spreading any such information. Many influencers, social media outlets, they have blatantly spread this misinformation and fake news. There was also a fake news about Indian Navy escorting these vessels, which is also a lie. Indian Navy has clarified that as of now, we are not escorting any vessels because the situation is very hot. It's very volatile and India is still not taking those chances. So as of now, there is no free pass given by Iran to India. And also don't forget, India has taken a very problematic position. India has condemned Iran, co-sponsored a resolution at UNSC against Iran for its actions in the conflict, while we have not condemned Israel and United States. Obviously, Iran would have taken note of that. So things might change, but as of now, no such permission has been granted for India, and all the vessels that have crossed, 3-4 vessels, they have done it at their own risk. Coming to the next point, the country is staring at a major energy problem. As I told you in the last 3 4 classes, crude oil and related hydrocarbons like petrol, diesel, ATF. This is not a problem for India as of now. We have sufficient buffer. Roughly 2 months buffer is present. We are diversifying the sources, and within few days, within few weeks, fresh oil will reach India from other sources, from Russia to US to West Africa. So there is no need to panic over shortage of crude oil, petrol, diesel, ATF. But definitely the oil prices are very high. It has crossed $100 per barrel. So you will see a rise in prices. Airlines have already increased the ticketing cost. They have to pass it down to the consumer. Oil marketing companies will be forced to pass it down, or either the government will absorb it, because petrol diesel prices are very politically sensitive. But supplies are assured. Supply is not a concern with regard to crude oil, petrol, diesel, and ATF. The concern, the real challenge is with LPG and LNG. Due to inadequate buffer, which lasts barely 1 to 2 days, and limited sources of supply, India is facing a massive crunch. Yes, the government has stepped up domestic production. It has increased by 25%, but that is not enough to take care of the demand. The government is saying that you need not worry, everything is fine, but things on the ground look different. If you look at verifiable, credible media reports, many hotels have shut down. PG accommodations, hostels, even tech park food courts in malls, they've started closing down, or they're using electric induction stoves and ovens. And gas based cooking is no longer feasible for several commercial establishments. But for household level, the government has assured that we will ensure enough supplies would be there. Government has invoked the Essential Commodities Act to prioritize the allocation of gas. Few priorities industries are also getting sufficient gas supplies. Household supplies are also being ensured, but non-priority industries are struggling. Many non-priority industries have already faced shutdowns because they are no longer able to operate. So this crisis is likely to perpetuate, right? Unless and until situation improves in West Asia and the blockade is removed, there are no easy alternate sources available. Domestic production will not take care of the local demand, right? India can try to manage it, but it will remain a persistent crisis for the next several months if the war drags and continues. Now, this highlights the need for India to take the right position in the conflict. Exerting pressure on the aggressors, that is US and Israel, is equally important because India is staring at a very, very serious challenge. Every industry is suffering thousands of crores worth of losses, which we have discussed in the last 1 week. Look at this article in today's paper. The mango pulp industry in Andhra Pradesh is staring at a loss of 1,300 crores. This will wipe out the mango farmers and the entire food processing chain that exists, especially near Chittoor. West Asia is a key market for export of mango pulp, and all the consignments are stuck at ports. Almost 300 crore worth of mango pulp is stuck. Another 1,000 crore worth of stocks are still in India and they can't be shipped because of the supply chain constraints. The long term concern is that to store mango pulp, you need these special barrels. You can see that in the image. These tanks that you see here, these barrels, they are made up of a very special material. It's a aseptic barrel, which basically avoids any bacterial infection. It does not contaminate the food. Such barrels are not produced in India. They are imported from Europe. Now, because of the supply chain risks and the complete disruption of shipping, the food processing industry will not be able to procure the barrels from European countries, which will have a cascading and long term effect. So, this is the kind of economic impact we are seeing across industries. So, for India to side with US and Israel, right, if not openly, there is a slight tilt that India has been showing. We even co sponsored a resolution against Iran at UN Security Council, which goes against our traditional balanced foreign policy, right? Traditionally, we have maintained this fine balance between Iran, the Sunni Arab powers, and Israel and United States. But now we are seeing India showing a slight tilt in favor of US and Israel, and we are seen to be acting against our relationship with Iran. So this has already brought in a lot of criticism from former diplomats and strategic experts to the opposition. They are questioning the Modi government. On what basis is India making these changes? Is it a compromise on our independent foreign policy and strategic autonomy? Right? So let's see how things play out. In the meanwhile, let me know what is your take on this. Is India doing the right thing by criticizing Iran, by co sponsoring resolutions against Iran? We didn't condole the death of Ayatollah Khamenei for almost a week. We did not condemn the Israeli American aggression against Iran. And we appear to show a slight tilt in favor of US and Israel. Is it the right policy for India? Or is the government doing the right thing? Please let me know in the comments. Next, there is a big update with regard to the global pandemic treaty. See, under the WHO, last year, the global pandemic treaty was negotiated at the World Health Assembly that takes place in Geneva, where WHO is headquartered. Right? So now countries are following up on the treaty. They are trying to work out. They are trying to work out pathogen access and benefit sharing protocol and the related rules, which will provide for a legally binding pandemic treaty. See, a pandemic treaty was conceptualized by WHO after the COVID-19 pandemic because the world was unprepared to deal with such a global scale pandemic. So, to improve the preparedness, to improve global surveillance, to watch out for epidemics and such outbreaks which can turn into a pandemic, there was a need for better cooperation, for sharing of pathogen related information and data, for sharing genome sequencing data, so that we can collaborate with regard to research, develop better vaccines, better therapeutics to prevent such large outbreaks from happening again. So the global pandemic treaty was worked out last year in 2025, and now the final uh, draft is being pushed out with additional protocols such as pathogen access and benefit sharing being added, and it will open for signature and ratification very soon. Once it is signed and ratified by the minimum number of countries, it will come into effect and it will be legally binding. Now, under the proposed pathogen access benefit sharing, countries are expected to share pathogen related data and information, or even samples of the pathogen itself. It could be a virus, it could be a bacteria, it could be a fungi. This is what you need to study the epidemiology of these pathogens, right? To understand their mutations, how it can affect human health or even animal and plant health, develop adequate treatments and vaccines and drugs. This research is very, very critical. So, sharing of pathogen samples and the related genome data and information is being debated and discussed under the Global Pandemic Treaty. Now, global south countries have an argument. Countries like India, they have made a group called the Group for Equity. Please write this down, very, very important for your prelims. Under the Group for Equity, which consists of developing nations from global south, they are arguing that if they share pathogen samples and genome data, they should get access to the benefits in return. Let's say, for example, India shares a virus sample with the global research community, or India shares the genome data of a certain bacteria which is being studied with the rest of the world. Now, using this sample from India or data from India, if a Western biotech company develops a vaccine or a drug, then the monetary benefit arising out of it should be provided towards India as well. A percentage of that should be given to India as royalty. Those vaccines should be shared with India as well. This is what you mean by access and benefit sharing. So that whenever vaccines come up and new treatments and drugs come up, it will benefit all the countries, even the developing, underdeveloped countries. Because see, they are contributing to this research to better understand pathogens and their epidemiology and their capability to trigger the next epidemic or pandemic. So in return, they are expecting monetary benefits. Whatever drugs or vaccines are developed, however it is monetized, a share of that revenue should reach the global south, the developing nations. And they should get access to those vaccines and drugs and technology as well, so that there is equitable sharing of these resources to fight the next pandemic. This is a condition which is being placed in front of World Health Organization by the Group for Equity. What is this Group for Equity? It's a grouping of 29 developing countries formed at the WHO as part of the intergovernmental negotiations, which is handling the pandemic treaty that's being negotiated. Is that clear? India is a part of it, along with China, Indonesia, Mexico, South Africa, Egypt, and many others. Their main goal is on ensuring that pandemic related products are accessible in an equitable manner for developing nations as well. So, if they share pathogen related information or samples and data, they are demanding access and benefit sharing in return. This is what we call as PABS, pathogen access and benefit sharing. You find the similar concept being implemented in Convention on Biological Diversity. Under CBD, there is a similar provision where traditional knowledge, biodiversity resources, if it is shared, then the benefits will have to be shared fairly and equitably with developing countries as well. So, similar clause is being pushed under the Global Pandemic Treaty by developing nations. Then we have an article on page number 10. The government is bringing out a new bill to amend the Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act 2019. And this proposed amendment has already created a lot of concern for the transgender community and for the civil society activists. And they are opposing the proposed changes. See, when it comes to transgender community, they have faced centuries of oppression, discrimination, and isolation by the society. In 2014, the Supreme Court of India delivered a big relief to the transgender community through a historic judgment in the Nalsa judgment of 2014. In the Nalsa case of 2014, the Supreme Court recognized the transgender community as the third gender, recognizing their basic constitutional rights and fundamental rights. The Supreme Court upheld the right to self determination, self identification of one's gender. It upheld the psychological sex allocation and psychological sex alignment or determination over the biological traits that an individual is born with, irrespective of the chromosomes you're carrying, irrespective of the genitalia that you have, depending on one's physiological outlook, psychological outlook. The Supreme Court recognized that an individual can self identify their gender. Now, this was a very progressive ruling in line with progressive legal jurisprudence across the world. The Supreme Court also said no mandatory surgery can be enforced on the transgender community, especially sex reassignment surgeries. They can't be forced on the community. And it mandated the government to protect the rights of the transgender community. So, accordingly, a law was introduced in 2019. It was a historic moment for the transgender community. They were now legally, constitutionally recognized as the third gender. And it gave for a very wide and broad definition as to who can be recognized as a transgender person. It could be a trans man, a trans woman, those who identify themselves as Kinner, Hijra, Aravani, Jokta, those who undergo various sex realignment therapies, including hormonal therapy, laser therapy, those who identify themselves as intersex or queer. So, such flexibility was given to recognize fluidity in sexual orientation. But now the government is proposing to undo the progressive changes that had happened. The government is saying that through this amendment, we will only recognize those individuals as transgenders who are biologically transgender. Meaning, let's say a kid born with a certain gender, right? Depending on the chromosome profile, the biological profile, and the genitalia the kid has, a certain gender is assigned at birth. But later, the kid associates with a different gender. This is something which nobody controls. It's not that that individual deliberately wants to switch their gender, right? So, in such cases, where it's beyond the individual's control, where biological reasons are responsible for identification with a different gender than the one assigned at birth, only such cases will be recognized as transgender going forward. It will not recognize sexual fluidity. It will not recognize those who identify themselves as queer because they feel like it. So, this previous progressiveness that was there in the Supreme Court judgment and the previous Transgender Protection of Rights Act, this is being undone by the government because, according to the government, the provision has been misused. So it is trying to restrict the definition to only those who are recognized as transgender because of their biological necessity and reasons, not because of how they feel psychologically. So this could end up disenfranchising a large number of the queer and transgender community and could have a impact on the LGBTQI community. So that is why the community members, the activists are opposing the changes. And this is likely to become a major controversy. So we will continue to follow this and track this particular development. Now, coming to the prelim section, 3 small articles. Let's quickly wrap it up. The opposition parties have pushed for the removal of Chief Election Commissioner of India. This is the first time ever that such a motion is being pushed in the parliament. Right? It has never occurred before, where the India bloc opposition MPs have pushed a resolution both in Rajya Sabha and in the Lok Sabha at the same time, calling for the removal of Chief Election Commissioner by accusing the CEC, the current CEC, Gyanesh Kumar, who heads the Election Commission of India, of discriminatory conduct and deliberate obstruction of investigation into electoral fraud. See, Election Commission of India has been conducting the SIR exercise, special intensive revision, where electoral rolls are being revised and revamped. Correct? So, all the outdated entries, dead voters or ineligible voters are being filtered out and removed from the list, and only eligible voters are being included in that particular list. So this has triggered a huge controversy. Particularly opposition parties are alleging that the ruling party is trying to misuse the exercise to disenfranchise a large section of Indian voters. And opposition parties have accused the Chief Election Commissioner and the Election Commission of India of being biased in favor of the ruling party. So on these grounds, opposition parties are bringing up these charges of discriminatory conduct on the part of the Chief Election Commissioner, who's expected to be neutral and unbiased. They are accusing the Chief Election Commissioner of deliberate obstruction of investigation into electoral fraud. Basically, the CEC, according to opposition parties, is acting in favor of the ruling party. So on these charges, they have pushed this notice both in Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha to seek the removal of Chief Election Commissioner. Now, what is the process outlined in the Indian Constitution? Because Election Commission of India is a constitutional body. The CEC is a constitutional office. So under Article 324, Clause 5, the removal of Chief Election Commissioner is similar to that of the removal of a judge of the Supreme Court or the High Court. The exact same process is followed. And to secure the independence of the election commissioners, Article 324 guarantees a special provision here where the terms of condition of service shall not be varied to the disadvantage of the election commissioners so that they can act independently without any fear or favor towards the government and the ruling party in power. Now, if the notice is pushed in the parliament, what happens next? So when you look at the process of removal of a judge of Supreme Court or High Court, the process outlined under the Judges Inquiry Act kicks into effect. So according to Judges Inquiry Act 1968, if such a notice is pushed simultaneously in Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha, then the Speaker of Lok Sabha and the Chairman of the Rajya Sabha, they jointly will set up a committee. And such a notice should have the support of minimum 50 MPs in Rajya Sabha and 100 MPs in the Lok Sabha. Only then the notice is admitted. The committee is constituted to inquire into these charges. And based on the committee's investigation, a voting will take place in both the houses. And if such a resolution is passed with the required majority, only then the CEC can be removed. The process is similar to the removal of a judge of the Supreme Court or the High Court. Coming to the next article, India and Seychelles have conducted their joint military exercise, LAMITIYE. LAMITIYE is a long-standing military exercise between India and Seychelles. Seychelles is a small island nation in the Indian Ocean region, located close to East Africa, part of the African continent. And historically, we share fantastic relations with Seychelles, especially in defense and security. In fact, India has donated naval assets and air assets to protect the coastline and the exclusive economic zone of Seychelles. We have supplied arms and weapons. We have provided military training as well. India has invested in the country and provided grants to assist the country during difficult times. So one of the major military exercise between India and Seychelles is LAMITIYE, which until now was just an army exercise between the two armies. But for the first time this year, it has been expanded into a tri-service edition, where all the three services, the Army, Navy, Air Force, have taken part in the LAMITIYE military exercise. Coming to the last topic for today, on page 12, there's an article referring to the ongoing conflict in Lebanon, where Israel is pounding even civilian targets as it focuses on hitting Hezbollah, which has been firing multiple missiles and drones towards Israel as part of the ongoing conflict in West Asia. So, in this article, there is a mention of a very important geographical reference point, the Litani River. Now, the Litani River is located in Lebanon. You can see here in the map. It is located over here in the Levant region of West Asia, and it flows into the Mediterranean Sea. Now, this river is a very important reference point with regard to the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah. As you know, Hezbollah is a Shia militant organization based out of Lebanon, backed by Iran as one of its proxies. Historically, there have been many such conflicts involving Israel and Hezbollah. There was a point when Hezbollah had carried out major strikes against Israel in the 1980s and 1990s. Israel had invaded into Lebanon, crossing the border, and it had essentially tried decimating Hezbollah back then. It even occupied a part of Lebanese territory. So back in the year 2000, the UN adopted a resolution and it implemented a demarcation line called the Blue Line, bringing out a ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. As part of the ceasefire, this blue line, a demilitarized zone, was created, and Israel was asked to retreat to its own borders, to leave Lebanese territory completely and withdraw all the troops beyond the border. And UN deployed a peacekeeping force, the UNIFIL, to basically monitor the blue line, to maintain peace over here. And as part of the ceasefire, Hezbollah was mandated to stay beyond the Litani River, to the north of the Litani River. Hezbollah was prohibited from crossing the Litani towards the south of Lebanon, because this is where Hezbollah had stationed most of its rockets and other projectiles. But of course, Hezbollah had violated this. And during the recent war, which began from October 7th, after the attack of Hamas, as Hezbollah joined the conflict and Israel started pounding Hezbollah in 2024, fresh conflict broke out. Israel again invaded into Lebanon, crossing the blue line and violating the previous UN resolution. So, to mediate this conflict, US, France, Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey, they negotiated between Israel and Hezbollah. And as per Resolution 1701, the blue line was reinforced near the Litani River. Israel was asked to retreat from here as part of the ceasefire, and Hezbollah was ordered to go back towards the north of Litani, ensuring that the south of Litani River becomes a demilitarized zone, which will be controlled only by Lebanese armed forces. So this river is back in the news. So please know the location, its relevance with regard to the UN Blue Line and the UN Phil peacekeeping mission. So this brings our today's analysis to an end. If you liked the session, understood all the topics, do press the like button, share your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.